panel today. And I'd like to ask Justin to please start us off with some information about pedagogical approaches as we fold in technology and entrepreneurship education. So Justin, it's all you.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. So definitely going to talk about our platform, Caseworks, but I'll just give you a little bit of background. I'll go really fast because we've got a lot of people, but I will put all of these resources in Whova as well as here so you can access them. So by trade, I'm a film producer. I actually teach at the film school at Cal State LA, but I did co-found Caseworks, which we'll be talking about, as well as Grid 110, which is a nonprofit tech accelerator in downtown Los Angeles. So I wanted to start off with a discussion about two areas of pedagogical approach that we might be looking at this time so that we can bring experiential education and keep it in the teaching of entrepreneurship, which can be really difficult now that we have all these obstacles. We're going to look at two main areas. One is the area of storytelling, and the other one is the area of stress, specifically stress inoculation. So everything I do is really built around storytelling from a teaching perspective. And there's two main reasons why I do that. The first is that the brain as an organ is an emotional organ before it is a logical organ. Logic came much later in the evolutionary chain for our brains. And so what we do is we build emotions and dispositions against something out in the world, and then we use logic to sort of back up our actions. So understanding that the brain is an emotional tool is really important, and understanding how storytelling is a way to unlock the brain for deeper understanding. The second element is, as a species, we really don't have a better container for experience or a way to pass experience across other people than storytelling. When you look at advanced learning, we move away from rote memorization, we move away from formulas, and we start moving into stories, parables, fables, this way of containing an experience and being able to pass down the lessons. So those are the two elements about story that are really, really important moving forward. The second area that we're going to focus on is stress inoculation. Some of you might be familiar with it. It is a cognitive behavioral therapy, a CBT. It's used widely in a lot of different afflictions, from PTSD to substance addiction, relationship issues. And SIT, stress inoculation therapy, is really about raising the floor in people, helping them find less things stressful over time, as opposed to making them learn with stress or making them cope with stress. One thing to understand about young people, if you look at them over the past century, not just the past few decades, but the past century, they have increasingly had high stress levels. It's always been trending up for over a century. In the past 2 decades, it's gotten really, really toxic, really, really pointed. We're seeing young adults do things that we would characterize as delaying adulthood. They're getting married later, they're having kids later, staying in the home later, starting businesses later. All these things are getting pushed off, and when you drill down into it, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are feeling incredibly high levels of stress, and this new pandemic that we're dealing with is only going to kick that up even further. So what we're trying to do is inoculate them against stress as opposed to insulate them from stress. We're trying to raise the floor and create a scaffolded, safe place where they can experience things that they would find stressful, but over time find them less stressful. So using those two elements together, that's really been our MO when building Caseworks. Now, Caseworks is a platform. We do a lot of different curricula. Entrepreneurship was our first one, but we have curricula in unconscious bias, difficult conversations in the workplace, 21st century skills. All these things are hard to master skills that will require confronting stressful situations. So the first curriculum that we built, which is called Street Fighting Entrepreneurship, it's used in about 25 institutions around the country and actually around the world. And what we did is we tried to create a series of stories. They play like short films. They're very high level production value. And what we're trying to do is get people emotionally engaged. The platform itself is designed to place people in emotional situations and then have them make decisions. That's the whole point of the platform. So once you watch these scenarios, you're driven toward a decision pathway, and you actually make decisions in the scenario. It's a choose your own ending type of experience. And we use that mechanism as a way to learn. when they're making these emotional decisions, we go back and we try to figure out, why did you make that decision? How might we build skills to help you make better decisions going forward? So that's the core element of it. The platform has a lot of bells and whistles, from, an embeddable timeline to chat areas and areas for asynchronous collaboration among cohorts. The production value is very high. So there's a lot of bells and whistles, but the main element is placing people in emotional situations that they might find stressful or triggering, giving them the opportunity to interact with decision-making, and then going back and learning through that experience. So we use that on Caseworks, but the two main elements of storytelling and stress inoculation, pretty much anybody can do. We don't have time to go through all these tips. I'll put some resources in the chat area, and as well as Huva. But on the storytelling side, one of the main things that you can remember is, the more you understand about story structure, which is a millennia-old craft, the better you get at that, the better you're going to be able to introduce it into your classroom and become a better educator. You can literally 10x your teaching efficacy by becoming a better storyteller. On the stress inoculation side, clarity is really the key. Clear learning objectives, clear communication pathways, clear expectations, and building ideas of nutritional conflict, which is the idea that conflict is not bad in and of itself. There is a lot of areas of conflict that we can isolate and scaffold so that we can learn more and really build those hard to master skills. So happy to talk on a deeper level for anybody who's hearing this. My email is below. You can also reach me at Huva, and I'll put a number of these resources in various places so that you can find them. But thanks a lot for joining us, and I look forward to hearing the next presentations. Thanks so much.
Justin, thank you very much. Christoph, to you to podcasts.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Justin and Julie for kicking us off. So what I will be talking about today is how I've been using a podcast in the classroom, which I initially used in a way to bring in some additional content and then have a conversation about these stories. Again, building off what Justin just said in terms of the storytelling element. Really learning from other people's stories, something that I find particularly interesting as relates to some of my initial work as an educational psychologist around self-regulation and really social cognition in particular. As we think about modeling, in particular cognitive modeling, as a way to get a better understanding how people think, how to reflect about different kinds of elements, and using this as a way to build our own self-efficacy on the one hand, but also use as a way to have a better way to prepare ourselves as we then take deliberate steps towards entrepreneurial action in our case. The problem statement that I started out with when I designed this particular exercise for my classroom, and I used this in particular for a graduate classroom in a graduate class in business modeling, but this can also be applied to many other types of similar classes, is really to leverage the power of storytelling for learning. Again, building what Justin just said, but also having this issue often that we cannot often bring those high quality guest speakers into our class, right? We at Iona College, we have some great alumni that we could bring into campus, but these are also very busy people. So is it often feasible and possible to bring in people on campus, but also scaling this in a way and replicating in a way to really use it as instructional tools. So I felt this was often frustrating that we often don't get the guest speakers that we need at a time that we want them. And also to learn from these stories, really the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's, I think, a lot of emphasis still on the success stories, particularly as we talk to students that often idolize particular entrepreneurs and often forget about the story behind it, the journey that people undertook, the failures that they encountered, and often sort of these breaking points that they encountered as a result of these experiences. And last but not least, also to demystify some of these successful entrepreneurs, that they're humans and not gods. And I think that's something that I try to really counter a lot of times, often mostly with the undergraduate students, but also often at the graduate level. So I created this assignment essentially using, and this is the assignment as I posted on the syllabus, but essentially what it does, it's a podcasting assignment where the students have to listen to the podcast from NPR's How I Built This by Guy Raz. And students in smaller teams individually have to listen to those podcasts, have to then create a visual story or a visual storyboard of that story. They then bring into the class, present that story, tell that story. And then as a team, as a group, as an entire class, we then develop together how the value proposition for the business or the businesses that these entrepreneurs have worked on have evolved, and ultimately also building out a business model as a result of that. The last part I usually did in the classroom by using like a large scale business model canvas on a whiteboard. But as we also move into an online environment, I will also show how I've been using this by using an online tool, the Canvanizer, which some of you may have used. An important element here is also the reflection piece, like what do these stories tell us? What are the lessons learned? How can I apply them to my business ideas as I then venture out and try to gain some traction there? These are some of the design elements for the assignment. These are again summarized here. We have the podcast, we have the visual storytelling element, the business modeling, and then the self-reflection, the action piece. Podcasts are external. I can bring them and then source them from any types of podcasts. I'm using the NPR podcast. Storytelling happens at the individual level or at the group level. The business modeling exercise is a collaborative exercise within the class. And then the reflection is something that we do as a class, but often also I prompt the students to then go back and really think about the lessons learned and how they can apply them. Okay, so this is how the class typically flows. Every beginning of the class, I either have a podcast that we will discuss or I bring in a guest speaker. In this case, I only focus on the podcast. And it was kind of interesting this year because we were at the USASP conference and they still had class and they didn't want to cancel class, actually did a Zoom class. And so whatever you see right now is the product of the Zoom class from earlier this year. In this particular case, two students were asked to review and more closely examine the podcast of Canva, or the story of Canva, in particular Melanie Perkins. So the students listened to the podcast and then created the digital story, which I'll share in a second now. So the students then created this, and this is sort of a collection of the screenshots. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, the students actually used Canva to create that visual story, which was pretty cool. And again, in very targeted ways, really tell that story about, from publishing, sort of how the issue has evolved in terms of, the issue of publishing, and how Melanie then and her team then gradually developed Canva and the various steps involved. Once the students came back and presented these ideas to the class, and on the left, you see a class how I did this in person, and on the right, I will show now how I've done this particular example in an online environment. I'm going to switch screens again. So I'll show you now how the students in that Zoom session have used the Canvanizer tool to collaborate on the development of this particular business model. So as you will see, we started off with, I assigned students to particular components of the business model canvas by name, and then I asked them individually to then reflect and go into that particular subject matter. So I'm gonna fast forward now. So as you see, gradually the business model evolved. Students made their contributions as we did this synchronously. And the business model sort of took shape, right? The story of Canva came to life in terms of a business model canvas. And once we sort of came to the conclusion, we then discussed the different elements. We dug a little bit deeper, we reflected about this, and also applied the lessons to the work that we did actually inside the classroom. Just wanted to show you how this was a dynamic process. This wasn't just somebody submitting something for the sake of submitting something.
Wonderful.
And I'm just have one more slide.
Sure.
The last piece, the reflective piece, is important. I usually do this inside the classroom, so I didn't have that much evidence here, but I looked in some of the reflective statements that the students have put together. In this case, the students said, the podcasts and the speakers in the class were extremely helpful in building my creative confidence. And again, giving the students sort of this gateway into somebody's thinking, how they reflected about their own work, but now applying these to their own lives is something I think that was very transformative as it relates to this particular exercise. All right, that's all that I have to say at this point in terms of an input. I also make the slides available online as well as some additional resources. Again, thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to continue the conversation.
This is great. Thank you, Christoph, very much. Ernie, would you like to show us what you've been up to with Marketplace?
So I've been spending a lot of time for the last 30 years creating online simulations in entrepreneurship. And this coronavirus has made it clear that we have to change the way we do things. And what's important is that I find the classroom is nice and I love it as much as anybody, but it's no longer necessary, all right? And we need to change. One of the things that I have been doing is working for a long time with, let's see here. I've been working with a lot of people for a number of years. Over 900,000 people around the world have used a marketplace simulation, and 100% of it is online. So I have a lot of experience there. Now, typically what happens is that they are all logged into the marketplace simulations, kind of like the hub. And before just a few weeks ago, they might be sitting in a team room, conference room, and working together, all logged in at the same time. What's different today is that they can be anywhere. And in fact, you as the instructor can log into Marketplace, can log into Zoom, and you can have meetings, just like the students have meetings, face-to-face meetings, but over Zoom. I want to give you a little bit of a flavor of this. We did a webinar last week, and I recorded a portion of it. And what the important thing is that with simulations, and I think with the other examples that you're seeing, is that we learn by doing. We learn as students and we learn as faculty, and we are learning now how to make this work. I'll tell you the game scenario, and then I'll run a short video. So in this game, you're starting up a new bicycle company, which will be targeted at a niche market. And you've licensed technology that allow you to use inexpensive carbon fiber and using 3D printing. With these two things together, you can cut the expenses dramatically in creating a carbon fiber bike. It'll still be a bit pricey, but far less than the existing carbon fiber bikes. And so that means a lot more people could get a carbon fiber bike. So the assignment is to test market this business concept in 3 segments: the recreation, mountain, and speed, and in 4 test markets: New York, Rio, Amsterdam, and Bangalore. Now, what I did was I recruited people from around the world that I work with. There's Mary Hannah Flesh in the United States, Paul Choi in South Korea, Bindu Agrawal in India, and Reno Senior in Dominican Republic. Here we had 4 people from all over the world who are working together dynamically, and each one of them has control of the software, and they can move around independently of the other members of the team. But if they share the screen, they can get everybody to focus in on something in particular, such as the market research, to determine a segment, or trying to figure out which city to start with test marketing, coming up with a company name, and so forth. And so everybody has access to everything simultaneously. And so it's kind of like the hub that everything revolves around. And then if you use video conferencing like Zoom, normally a little better than what we see here, or video chat, or even a phone call, a conference call, they can all collaborate. And one of the things which you see is that students have a lot of experience, and even you as faculty member do too. And it's really quite natural. In fact, in my business, I work with product developers, designers, support people, customers all over the world, just like what we're doing here. And this is the norm. And we can take advantage of that in learning in an online environment. So that was the message that I wanted to give you.
Wonderful, Ernie. And definitely do share not just the short video clip, but I think that you had said you even had a longer video clip that kind of demonstrated this in detail. So make sure that we get that in the Whova app so that people can reference it. Okay, Elisa, you're up.
So I think the genesis of this conference being online is actually largely the genesis of this particular session of the conference as well. The fact that we, of course, can't be together, and the consequence is that we must use technology-mediated options to connect with each other, to connect with our students, to connect with our colleagues. And I think that what we've heard so far is that the common link here isn't just that, but this notion of technology. And all of the technologies that I have seen so far are technologies that would work well both on campus and off campus. These are technologies that can enhance your regular on-campus classroom and make your classroom more engaging and more efficient. There are things that you can do using these technologies that if you were to do them without the technologies in class would slow things down. And yet at the same time, these are things that you can pull off online 100%, as Ernie just showed, and students can function very well, very effectively, and they don't even actually need the physical classroom at all. What my interest has been for a long time, and frankly, I thought it was chasing a little bit of a fool's errand, it was just a hobby, was trying to figure out how can I actually build my own things. And so what I'm trying to bring to this conversation, or what I was asked to bring to this conversation, was a little bit of that. And anybody who knows me has heard some version of this, but I'm going to do a little bit differently today. And that was this notion of what can you do yourself if you can't purchase things or don't want to, though the purchasable things. I've seen Ernie's marketplace simulation demoed multiple times over the years. It's extraordinary. And similarly, what Justin and Jason, his partner, have been building in Caseworks is fantastic. I'm totally going to steal Christoph's idea for my classes when I go back to teaching. They're giving me a momentary breather, so I learned how to be the director of the center. But what I thought I would focus on is more of what I do. And there's a few things that I start out with, which is just, if you want to create your own things, there's a few, I think, rules of the road that I would propose, and that's on the next slide. And these are rules that have always been true to me as I've tried to build things and as I've worked with others to build things. I don't see the slide, but hopefully you see a person breaking the rules by standing on the grass. And what the slide would say is that my personal rules of the do-it-yourself road for trying to create technology interventions is that there's very easy installation, very reliable installation, or that it could be on the cloud, so there's zero installation, that it's very intuitive. You can figure out how to use it almost immediately, that you can scale it from 10 students to 1,000 students without even practically blinking an eye. And in my ideal world, not just because I'm miserly, it's free or cheap, because there's just a lot of schools out there and a lot of students. The schools, the faculty, the staff, and the students might not have access. And this way you get universal access, of course, with the big if being you still have to have the technology and the computer connection, which also obviously does exclude people. So I thought I'd give you a walk through something that we've built in the last 2 weeks, which has been exhausting, but also exhilarating. We still don't know how it's going to turn out. And that's what we've been calling the Hack for Hope at USC, which is on the next slide. You'll see the homepage of it. And what had happened was a lot of people in our university were running around trying to figure out what could be done to help. And for some reason, I decided, I have not yet decided whether this was a silly decision, a foolish decision, or a good decision, that we should build an online hackathon, even though we'd never done that before. And that we would try to build it very, very quickly and try to launch it and run it. This was the website that we set up on Squarespace. Somebody who was attached tweeted that we'd launched it before we'd actually made it public. And our crosstown rival, UCLA, promptly tweeted back that while they're usually rivals, they liked what we were doing. And on that basis, I gave them a call, Elaine Hagan over at UCLA, and say, well, rather than just like what we're doing, how about you join us? And it became the USC-UCLA Rivals Unite Hack for Hope. We launched it just 10 days ago. The submissions are going to be due in 2 days. And what you see is the front-end web screen, very inexpensive through Squarespace, set up in just 4 hours. If you go to the next page, you can see we had all of the communication go through students with signing up in what's called Discord, which is used by many gamers, but it's much like Slack. A tremendous number of people can sign up. It's free, and they can begin to communicate. I'll just call attention to a few different pieces of this. If you click once, Tam, you should open up a red circle around the left bar, or square rather, rectangle. What you see there are all of the individual teams. So they each have their own channel in which to communicate asynchronously and rapidly through instant messaging. If you click again, you'll see on the right-hand side that you also have the ability as people come in to label their skill sets. So we had to figure out how to connect teammates, and this was one of the ways we did it. If you click again, you'll see that it has functionality where some of the names are actually in this picture, all of the names are green. This is because we had legal disclaimers that people needed to read and acknowledge, and the system is smart enough that when people would do something inside of Discord, it changed their name to green. So just by glancing at the names, we would know who saw and who didn't see the legal disclaimer. And finally, in the middle section, you have the ability, much like Slack, to post and embed all sorts of content that you find if you click again. And helping us navigate this in the background is a real-time dashboard, if you click again, that shows us how many people are in the system. I created the slides this morning. Effective this morning, we had about 450 people in there. So it's been a little bit crazy. I'm sorry, that wasn't a laugh because it was funny. It was a laugh like I'm ready to go into an insane asylum. It was a little bit crazy to do this, but it is what it is. And you can also see how people code themselves. If you go to the next slide, you can see there's also a place called DevPost, which exists, which you can sign up on for free, where people can submit their projects. If you advance to the next slide, what you can see is that by using free or almost free tools, you can assemble some remarkable things pretty quickly. I don't know if the output is going to be remarkable, but I certainly think the effort has been remarkable. The team of about 6 of us have put this together. We used Squarespace for the website, DevPost as a project receptacle, Discord for communication. We had signups and forms. We used Google Drive. Of course, Zoom for meetings where we brought in guest speakers and mentors. And then the final projects will be uploaded to Vimeo. And by doing this, we have people participating from all over the world. And the total price tag has been for us about $200. And it's just an example, I think, of how these various individual tools can be put together to build really a tremendous number of things. If you're talking about video cases and you can't afford Caseworks or it's not something that you choose, you can do selfie videos where people film themselves. Your students can record their own podcast. I don't think anybody can build a simulation. I think you got to go to Ernie for that one. That's pretty extraordinary. But that was just another thing I wanted to throw out there. And I don't know what the next slide says. You'll have to remind me. That's all. I think that in this time of uncertainty, we teach about how to cope and navigate and walk the walk at times of dynamism and uncertainty. And so all of these tools allow us to do that. And I don't think there's that much harm in rolling the dice a little bit right now and allowing our students to go along on the ride and seeing us try to walk our talk. And on that note, I'll stop talking.
All impressive things. So one, what do you envision is the role of the instructor during this time of complete, in many cases, complete change of mode of delivery? And two, what are some like 2 or 3 simple things that instructors can do to translate what they're currently doing and moving it onto some kind of an online platform?
I view the instructor in a different role, much more of a coach. All right. If you think about instructor and teacher, it's giving information. And I like to view the professor as a coach, where the students are really engaged in something that's challenging, that's requiring that they apply the knowledge that they have been gaining, and working to develop skills. And what you have is a coach who can challenge them even more to identify things that maybe they're overlooking, they're not thinking about, that maybe their horizon's not large enough. And sometimes even to give a little bit of a chalk talk on things that are clear that they are missing. So they get information and principles and insight at a point in time when it's most relevant to them, because they're facing something that's challenging them or they're overlooking. And you'll see that they pay attention so much more because you're helping them move their business forward. So I like the role of a coach. All right.
Good.
And I think it works in these other cases as well.
So anybody else different kind of archetype than a coach in this? Yes, Justin, and then Elisa.
The 2 main things I would say, the less physicality you have, the less real world ability to be in physical proximity, the more tangibility you have to bring. So that means more real world cases, focusing on their ventures, things that are really going to lock them in an immersive or paying attention type state. The more theoretical you get, if you stay theoretical in these environments, it becomes very isolating and becomes very distancing from an intellectual perspective. So any attempts you can bring to introduce more tangibility from real world examples, speakers, I think all of that's going to help. From a educator perspective, my advice is find the tools you're going to use and then become experts in them. There's nothing worse than stumbling through tech issues and not knowing how to use a particular platform, whether it's Zoom, whether it's our platform, whether it's another platform. It really throws people out, and it's hard to get them back after. So I would say those two things come forefront to mind.
I agree with everything that's been said previously, but I think I would add that college is so much more than the classroom. And so what our students are losing right now isn't just the classroom environment and the content, it's the community, it's the togetherness, it's the moral support, it's the friendships. And because they're probably primarily coming together now inside of the online classroom, I think it adds an additional challenge for the faculty member, which is a good challenge, but definitely a challenge, which is to serve as a role model of hopefully what graceful leadership is, by helping them connect, by being calm, in some ways, though I don't want to overstate it, almost being not a therapist, but a supporting mechanism that allows them to understand that the stress they're feeling is okay, is normal, is universal, and that you as their instructor have the tools to help them, at least in this environment. And so I think that it's really an opportunity for all of us as instructors to role model humanity. I know that sounds a little bit too grandiose perhaps, but I feel very strongly about it, that in some ways that reminder of all of our sort of shared frailty, all the shared challenges that people are facing, that's what's going to be that extra thing beyond the classroom that people will remember beyond this.
Can I add to this, because I really like how the response has built up from like the coaching mentality to, really sort of trying to, understand the tools to, understanding the humanity of what it actually means to have a classroom, however we define it. And I've said this, through numerous occasions, particularly as we prepared our faculty at the college for online education. But, essentially we're instructional designers, right? We have to create a new learning environment. And as a result, when we design something, I felt that the design thinking process in itself is very critical as a tool, as a methodology for us to engage in that journey. So empathy building is core and center, pretty much echoing what Elisa just said. If I do not understand who my students are that I'm trying to serve, and in relation to the learning objectives that I would like to accomplish, I'm off to a false start. So, what I told many, many people is that, the students that we said goodbye to before our spring break are not the same students that we welcome back into our Zoom sessions or into our online classroom environments. And I think that was an important realization that, we need to understand the new circumstances in which the students find themselves in. We had students who, had access to only 2 computers, yet they were working parents at home. They had a second sibling, having not access to quiet space. So really thinking about the notion of synchronous versus asynchronous in relationship to giving students access. So access and equity are issues I think that we found particularly in our, through conversations with colleagues at different kinds of universities has become a big issue. And I think as we design these environments, as we select those tools, yes, we need to understand how to use those tools. We also need to understand who our students are in order to best serve them, in order to give them a chance for learning and success.
Wonderful. Okay, one more question, because we have 5 minutes left and want to make sure that we give each of you kind of a challenge question here. So we talked about students being isolated. How can faculty support each other? Like, this is an amazing conference and it's taking place over 2 days, but over the long haul, over the next couple of months, how do faculty support each other? And what are some tips and recommendations you have for faculty who are trying to do this and learn from it at the same time?
Pick up your phone and call a friend, a colleague. You never know where somebody is. I received calls or text messages where I was like, not in a good place, and then you have a conversation and you refocus and you recenter. So I think, just leveraging the community that we have and nurturing that in a way, I think, to connect with people that we may only see at a conference or randomly throughout the year.
I'd say get on a project. I mean, what Elisa's doing with USC and UCLA is a great example. I think project-based learning is going to supplant a lot of the academic work that a lot of us have been doing, because it's not only is it hard, but it's even more isolating. So when you're doubly isolated, doing that type of work is difficult. But project-based learning can bring a lot of the same insights that you can bring into the classroom. So this is a really good opportunity to find those those colleagues in a project and get to it.
I don't know, this is exactly answering your question. I mean, obviously you can use Discord or you can use Slack. We could create a group where people communicate and share ideas, but that's entirely a function of whether or not people choose to go in. And I do think it springs from colleagues. But I would say that there's a future aspect of this. What we're in now is not what we're going to be in 2 months from now or 6 months from now. And I think that education as we know it, and college and academia and learning as we know it, is going to be fundamentally altered by this experience for everybody. So now is the time for us to begin to work together and consider, how do we begin to build for our future? Because the post-COVID-19 world, to the extent that there is a post-COVID-19 world, I think it's going to look very, very different. And if yesterday wasn't the time to do it or prepare for it, now certainly is. Today is.
Last week, I ran a 4-hour intensive training program, and I had 35 faculty from around the world who wanted to learn the process of working with students, both being the student and how they would work with people who they never met before. So I would put 3 faculty into a room, and they were in charge of a company, and they had to do the same kind of a thing their students did. And then I brought in faculty who served as coaches. And so they would come in and visit each team, and they would do an executive briefing. And so we went through this cycle 3 times of the teams working on some aspect of their business. Then a coach comes in and reviews their thinking, the kinds of decisions, analysis, and where they were going. Step out of the room and let them go and finish up and move on to the next quarter. So this kind of goes back to the Chinese proverb of, if I tell you something, you're going to forget 90% of what I tell you. If I show it to you, like I tried to do, you'll remember. But to fully understand it, you have to do it. And as I look at the examples of the other panel members, I would think that's a great way for us to learn from them. And it doesn't have to be 4 hours, an hour, or something like that, where you can roll up your sleeves and do it so that you're not left imagining what that person is suggesting to you. So I would offer that in terms of helping other faculty.
Great. Well, Elisa, Christoph, Justin, Ernie, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you also to Tam and Sky for helping us on the tech side. Please do make sure to stick around a little bit longer in Huva, because some of our attendees may want to ask you some questions, either via the app or online here. Thank you all very much, and look forward to maybe seeing you at the social later, right? Thanks, everybody.